Sometimes the moment that looks most shocking is actually the moment someone chooses to protect another person's dignity. Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light across the grand ballroom of the Ashford Hotel, where the city's annual charity gala gathered business leaders, politicians, philanthropists, and the most influential families from across the state. A live orchestra filled the elegant room with soft classical music, while servers moved gracefully between beautifully decorated tables carrying sparkling glasses and carefully prepared dinners. Every guest smiled politely. Every conversation sounded carefully rehearsed, and every camera seemed focused on finding the next headline. White Mafia boss Dominic Carter entered without making an announcement, yet the atmosphere shifted the moment he crossed the marble floor. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black Italian suit with a crisp white shirt and black silk tie, he acknowledged guests with little more than a quiet nod before taking his reserved seat near the center of the ballroom. His calm expression revealed almost nothing, but those who knew him understood he rarely overlooked even the smallest detail inside a crowded room. Several tables away, black, curvy young woman Nia Brooks adjusted the navy evening dress she had borrowed from a close friend before taking a slow breath. She had been invited to speak briefly about a community youth program that had recently received charitable funding, and although she carried herself with quiet confidence, the size of the event made her understandably nervous. Her warm smile, natural kindness, and graceful presence drew respectful attention wherever she walked. Yet she seemed completely unaware of the admiring glances following her across the ballroom. As she greeted organizers and volunteers, she failed to notice another pair of eyes watching her far more carefully. Richard Hale, a wealthy investor known for his polished manners and generous public image, stood near the dance floor speaking pleasantly with several guests while quietly observing Nia's movements. His smile never changed, but Dominic noticed the pattern almost immediately. Twice Richard interrupted conversations simply to move closer whenever Nia changed locations. Twice he quietly dismissed other discussions the moment she appeared nearby. Dominic remained seated, listening to the orchestra while appearing completely relaxed, yet his attention never drifted far from the growing situation unfolding across the room. Moments later, the master of ceremonies invited everyone to enjoy the opening dance before the evening program officially began. Guests slowly gathered near the polished wooden floor, laughter echoing beneath the crystal chandeliers. Nia politely stepped aside, preferring to remain near the edge of the ballroom rather than join the dancers. Richard began walking directly toward her with confident steps and an easy smile. At precisely the same moment, Dominic stood from his chair. The distance between them closed within seconds. Before anyone could understand what was happening, Dominic gently reached out, took Nia's hand with calm respect, and quietly guided her toward his private table. With remarkable composure, he seated himself and carefully invited her to sit across his lap for only a brief moment, so that she remained completely shielded between him and the approaching path Richard had been taking. There was nothing playful or careless in his expression. His face remained composed, focused entirely on the room around them rather than on the unexpected attention they had instantly attracted. The orchestra faltered. Conversations stopped in mid-sentence. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the pair in stunned silence. Nia froze in complete surprise, too shocked to understand why one of the most powerful men in the room had created a moment that would undoubtedly become the only thing anyone remembered about the evening. Across the ballroom, Richard stopped walking without saying a single word, his confident smile disappearing almost instantly before he quietly turned away in another direction, and Dominic watched him leave with an expression that suggested this astonishing moment had unfolded exactly as he intended. Nia Brooks remained motionless for several long seconds, her heartbeat racing as the entire ballroom seemed to disappear beneath the weight of hundreds of silent stares. She carefully looked toward Dominic Carter, searching his composed expression for some explanation, but the White Mafia boss appeared remarkably calm, as though nothing unusual had happened. His posture remained respectful, his attention fixed not on her but on the guests scattered throughout the ballroom. After only a brief moment, he quietly helped her back to her feet with the same courtesy he would have shown any honored guest. "Please forgive me," he said in a low voice that only she could hear. "Remain beside this table for a few minutes. I promise I will explain later." Nia opened her mouth to ask why, But before she could speak, several photographers raised their cameras. Bright flashes illuminated the ballroom, while whispered conversations spread from one table to another faster than the orchestra could resume playing. Some guests exchanged confused glances. Others quietly speculated about a secret relationship that no one had ever suspected. A few smiled with curiosity, believing they had just witnessed the beginning of an unexpected romance. Nia felt heat rising to her cheeks, not because Dominic had treated her disrespectfully, but because she had suddenly become the center of attention in a room filled with strangers. Across the ballroom, Richard Hale accepted a glass of sparkling water from a server, though his relaxed smile had noticeably disappeared. He glanced once toward Dominic before politely excusing himself from the conversation he had been having only moments earlier. Dominic noticed every movement without turning his head. He calmly adjusted his cuff links and greeted another guest with his usual quiet confidence, giving no indication that anything extraordinary had occurred. Nia watched him in growing confusion. Nothing about his behavior suggested a man interested in creating unnecessary attention. In fact, he seemed almost disappointed by the reaction surrounding them. The master of ceremonies finally encouraged everyone to continue enjoying the evening, and conversations slowly returned, although the atmosphere had undeniably changed. Rumors drifted from one elegant table to another while musicians carefully resumed the interrupted performance. Evelyn Carter, the event coordinator, approached Nia with a reassuring smile. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Nia nodded politely, though uncertainty remained written across her face. "I think so," she answered honestly. "I just do not understand what happened." Evelyn looked briefly toward Dominic before lowering her voice. "Neither do I. Mr. Carter never acts without a reason." Those simple words lingered in Nia's thoughts. She had heard countless stories about Dominic's discipline, restraint, and thoughtful judgment. None of them matched what had just happened. Yet something deep inside her resisted believing that he had acted carelessly. She remembered the look on his face during those few astonishing seconds. There had been no arrogance, no amusement, and no attempt to impress anyone. Only quiet concentration. As the evening continued, Dominic remained close enough for Nia to notice, though he never attempted another unexpected gesture. Instead, he greeted donors, thanked volunteers, and spoke respectfully with community leaders while discreetly observing the room with the awareness of someone who never stopped paying attention. Several minutes later, one of the estate security specialists entered through a side hallway and walked directly toward Dominic. The conversation between them lasted only a few seconds before the guard gave a subtle nod and quietly stepped away. Dominic allowed himself the smallest breath of relief he had shown all evening. At almost the same moment, Nia glanced toward the ballroom entrance and realized Richard Hale was no longer anywhere in the room, and for reasons she could not yet explain, Dominic seemed to have expected that outcome from the very beginning. The remainder of the charity gala unfolded beneath an elegant surface, yet Nia Brooks could not shake the feeling that she had become part of a story no one had bothered to explain. Although conversations gradually returned, and the orchestra once again filled the ballroom with soft music, every few minutes she caught someone quietly glancing in her direction before whispering to another guest. She had attended community events before, but never anything that placed her under such relentless attention. Dominic Carter, however, behaved exactly as he always had according to everyone who knew him. He thanked donors, greeted volunteers, and listened patiently to presentations about future charitable projects. Not once did he attempt to approach Nia again. That unexpected distance only deepened her confusion. If he had wanted to embarrass her, why had he immediately stepped back? If he had wanted attention, why was he now avoiding every opportunity to stand beside her? As those questions continued circling through her mind, Evelyn Carter quietly joined her near one of the ballroom windows overlooking the city skyline. "You are handling this remarkably well," Evelyn said with a reassuring smile. Nia exhaled softly before answering. "I am trying to understand what happened before I decide how to feel about it." Evelyn nodded with quiet respect. "That sounds exactly like something Dominic would hope you would do." Before Nia could ask another question, one of the event's security supervisors approached Dominic from across the room. The conversation lasted only seconds, but Nia noticed something important. The supervisor discreetly handed Dominic a small envelope before whispering a few words. Dominic read a single page inside, folded it carefully, and allowed himself the slightest expression of relief. It was the first genuine emotion she had seen on his face all evening. Several moments later, Dominic politely excused himself from a discussion with several business leaders and walked toward the balcony overlooking the hotel's illuminated courtyard. The cool evening air replaced the warmth of the ballroom as he stepped outside alone. Hidden from the crowd, he removed a secure communication device from his jacket pocket. "Report," he said quietly. A calm voice answered almost immediately. "Richard Hale has departed the hotel. He canceled the private meeting he arranged after the gala and has left the property. Our team confirmed he changed his plans the moment the incident in the ballroom occurred." Dominic closed his eyes briefly before responding. "Continue observing from a distance. No unnecessary contact." The communication ended as quietly as it had begun. Dominic remained standing beneath the winter sky for another moment before looking across the city lights with a thoughtful expression that carried neither satisfaction nor pride. Inside the ballroom, Nia watched him through the glass doors without understanding why someone would appear relieved after becoming the center of a public misunderstanding. She remembered Richard's confident smile disappearing the instant Dominic had guided her away from the dance floor. She remembered how quickly he had left the gala without speaking to her at all. The sequence suddenly felt too deliberate to be coincidence. As the evening drew closer to its conclusion, curiosity slowly replaced embarrassment. There had to be a reason why one of the most disciplined men in the city had willingly accepted public criticism over a single unexpected moment. Nia did not yet know what that reason was, but she had begun to suspect that the most shocking event of the evening had never been the brief misunderstanding witnessed by hundreds of guests. It had been the silent decision made long before the music started, when Dominic chose to protect someone at the cost of his own reputation, and somewhere beyond the glittering ballroom, a truth still hidden from everyone else was quietly waiting to be discovered. The morning after the charity gala, Nia Brooks woke up still thinking about the moment that had changed the entire evening. She had replayed every detail countless times. The surprised expressions of the guests, the sudden silence when the orchestra stopped, the way Dominic Carter had looked around the room instead of looking at her. Nothing about his behavior matched the rumors spreading through the city. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the moment everyone had judged might have been something completely different. Determined to find the truth, Nia returned to the community center where she worked. The familiar rooms filled with books, artwork, and children preparing for their daily activities reminded her why she had attended the gala in the first place. She had never wanted attention. She had only wanted support for the youth programs that meant everything to her. As she organized documents in her office, Evelyn Carter arrived carrying a folder and a thoughtful expression. "There is something you should know," Evelyn said gently. Nia looked up with curiosity. "About Dominic?" Evelyn nodded. "About what happened last night." She placed the folder on the desk, but did not open it immediately. Dominic is not a man who acts without a reason. Many people misunderstand him because he rarely explains himself. Nia looked toward the window, remembering his calm expression during the chaos of the ballroom. "Then why did he not simply tell me what was happening?" Evelyn paused before answering. "Because sometimes protecting someone means accepting that they may misunderstand you." Those words stayed with Nia. Later that afternoon, Dominic arrived at the community center unexpectedly. He did not arrive with cameras, assistants, or a group of people announcing his presence. He simply walked through the front doors carrying several boxes of donated educational materials. Nia watched from across the room as he greeted teachers, thanked volunteers, and helped organize supplies without seeking recognition. When their eyes finally met, both of them remained silent for a moment. Dominic approached carefully, maintaining a respectful distance. "I owe you an explanation," he said quietly. Nia studied his expression before responding. "I would appreciate one." He nodded. "Last night was not about creating attention. It was about preventing something that could have caused you much greater discomfort." Nia waited for him to continue. Dominic looked toward the busy classrooms filled with students before speaking again. "Richard Hale has a reputation for using influence to pressure people into situations they do not want to be part of. I noticed the way he approached you throughout the evening. I also knew he had arranged a private conversation with you after the event." Nia's expression changed as she remembered how quickly Richard disappeared after Dominic intervened. "How did you know?" she asked. Dominic answered simply, Because I pay attention to people who believe they can take advantage of kindness. The room around them continued moving, but for Nia, everything seemed to become quiet. She finally understood that the shocking moment at the gala had never been about embarrassment or control. It had been a decision made in seconds by a man who was willing to let hundreds of people misunderstand him if it meant one person could remain safe and respected. Yet before she could ask more questions, Dominic's phone quietly received another message, and the expression on his face revealed that the truth about Richard Hale was only beginning to come into the light. The message on Dominic Carter's phone changed the atmosphere around them, but he did not react with anger or panic. He simply looked at the screen, took a quiet breath, and placed the phone back into his pocket. Nia Brooks noticed the small change in his expression. It was not fear. It was the look of someone who had just received confirmation that a difficult truth was finally moving toward the surface. "Is everything all right?" Nia asked softly. Dominic looked at her and answered honestly. "It is something that should have been revealed a long time ago." Later that afternoon, Dominic invited Nia to a private meeting room at the community center rather than his office. He wanted the conversation to happen in a place that represented her values, not his world of power and influence. The room was simple, surrounded by bookshelves, student artwork, and handwritten notes from children who had benefited from the programs she helped create. Dominic placed a folder on the table and slowly opened it. Inside were records showing that Richard Hale had repeatedly used his public image to gain private advantages over people who depended on opportunities from wealthy investors. The documents did not contain dramatic scenes or rumors. They contained carefully collected information, witness statements, and formal complaints that had been ignored because many people were afraid of challenging someone with influence. Nia read the pages quietly, her expression changing with every detail. She remembered Richard's confident smile at the gala and the way he had acted, as though everyone around him existed only to support his plans. "Why did you not expose him immediately?" she asked. Dominic looked toward the window where children were playing outside in the community garden. "Because accusations without preparation can sometimes hurt the people they are meant to protect." Nia understood then that Dominic had not been waiting to create a dramatic moment. He had been waiting for the right moment to prevent more people from being affected. "You allowed everyone to think the worst of you," she said. Dominic gave a small nod. "People have believed worse things about me before." His answer was calm, but Nia heard the weight behind those words. For years, Dominic had accepted being misunderstood because he believed reputation was less important than results. Yet this time, the misunderstanding had involved her, and that was different. "You could have explained everything at the gala," Nia said. Dominic looked down briefly before answering. "If I had told you everything in that moment, Richard would have known exactly what I was doing. He would have changed his behavior, and others might never have had the chance to speak." The room became quiet as Nia processed his explanation. She had expected arrogance from a man with his power. Instead, she found patience. She had expected control. Instead, she found restraint. She had expected someone protecting his own image. Instead, she found someone willing to sacrifice it. Before leaving, Dominic stopped near the doorway and turned back toward her. "I am sorry that my decision placed you in an uncomfortable position. You deserved an explanation sooner." Nia looked at him carefully. For the first time, she saw beyond the reputation, beyond the rumors, and beyond the intimidating presence everyone else noticed. She saw a man who carried responsibility silently and accepted judgment without complaint. Outside the community center, the afternoon sunlight stretched across the pavement as children laughed in the distance. The truth had finally begun to replace the rumors, but Nia knew the most important question was no longer why Dominic had shocked the room at the gala. The question was what kind of person would willingly let the entire world misunderstand him just to protect someone else's dignity. The days following the revelation about Richard Hale brought an unexpected change to the atmosphere surrounding Dominic Carter and Nia Brooks. The rumors that once filled conversations at the charity gala slowly disappeared as more people began to understand the truth behind that unforgettable evening. Yet Dominic never celebrated being proven right. He never held a press conference, never accepted public praise, and never used the situation to strengthen his reputation. Instead, he returned his attention to the work that had always mattered most to him, supporting communities and creating opportunities for people who rarely received them. Nia noticed this quietly from a distance. The more time she spent around Dominic, the more she realized how different he was from the image many people believed. The city saw a powerful white mafia boss surrounded by influence and wealth. She saw a man who arrived early at community events, remembered the names of volunteers, and listened carefully when others spoke. One afternoon, Nia found Dominic organizing donated books inside a small classroom at the community center. His expensive suit looked completely out of place among colorful posters and children's artwork, yet he seemed more comfortable there than inside any luxury ballroom. "You know," Nia said with a gentle smile, "most people would send someone else to do this." Dominic placed a book carefully onto the shelf before answering. "Most people assume showing up is not important." Nia watched him for a moment. "And you disagree?" Dominic nodded. "People remember when someone chooses to be present." Those simple words stayed with her. She realized that Dominic's actions were rarely designed to impress anyone. They came from a belief that respect was something demonstrated through choices, not announced through titles. Later that evening, Dominic and Nia walked through the community garden behind the center. The sunset painted the sky with warm shades of orange and gold, while families enjoyed the peaceful space created through the foundation's support. For the first time since the gala, there was no confusion between them. Only honest conversation. "I owe you an apology too," Nia said quietly. Dominic looked surprised. "For what?" She smiled softly. "For assuming the worst before asking the right questions." Dominic looked toward the garden path ahead. "You had every reason to be confused." "Maybe," she replied. "But I have learned that sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying the most responsibility." A comfortable silence followed. It was not the uncomfortable silence from the night of the gala. It was the kind of silence shared between two people who no longer needed to prove anything. Dominic eventually spoke again. "I know what people think of me. I know my name makes some people uncomfortable." Nia looked at him with understanding. A reputation can tell a story, but it does not always tell the whole story. Those words affected him more than she realized. For years, Dominic had accepted being judged because he believed explanations were unnecessary. But standing beside Nia, he began to understand something different. Sometimes allowing people to misunderstand you is not strength. Sometimes the stronger choice was trusting someone enough to let them see the truth. As evening settled over the community center, Dominic and Nia continued walking beneath the soft garden lights. Neither of them knew exactly where this unexpected connection would lead, but both understood that the moment at the gala had changed something important. What began as a shocking misunderstanding had slowly become a lesson about trust, dignity, and the quiet kindness hidden behind a powerful man's actions. The relationship between Dominic Carter and Nia Brooks changed quietly, almost unnoticed by the world around them. There were no dramatic announcements, no public statements, and no carefully planned moments designed for attention. Instead, their understanding grew through small conversations, shared responsibilities, and the simple trust that developed whenever they spent time together. For Dominic, this change was unfamiliar. He had spent years building a life where every decision was calculated, every emotion carefully controlled, and every weakness hidden behind a powerful image. Yet around Nia, he found himself speaking more honestly than he ever had before. One rainy afternoon, Dominic visited the community center to attend a meeting about expanding educational programs. When he arrived, he found Nia sitting with several teachers, reviewing ideas for new workshops that would help young people discover their talents. He stood quietly near the doorway for a moment, watching her lead the conversation with confidence and kindness. She was not trying to impress anyone. She simply cared about making a difference. Dominic realized that the quality he admired most about her was the same quality he had tried to protect during the gala. Nia valued people before appearances. After the meeting ended, they walked together through the hallway decorated with student artwork. "You always seem surprised when people respect you," Nia said. Dominic looked at her with curiosity. "Why would you say that?" She smiled gently. "Because every time someone thanks you, you look like you are waiting for them to discover something they dislike." Her observation caught him off guard. For a moment, the confident man known throughout the city had no answer. Finally, he admitted, "Maybe I became used to people seeing only one version of me." Nia stopped walking and looked at him. "Then maybe it is time they see the whole person." Those words stayed with Dominic long after he left the community center. That evening, He returned to his office overlooking the city skyline. The room was exactly as it had always been, organized, elegant, and silent. But for the first time in years, the silence felt different. He looked at the photographs and documents surrounding his desk and realized how much of his life had been built around responsibility while leaving very little space for connection. The following week, Dominic made a decision that surprised many people close to him. He invited Nia to become a formal advisor for the Foundation's future projects. He did not want her kindness to remain something he simply admired from a distance. He wanted her perspective to shape the work they were doing together. When Nia received the offer, she was hesitant. "Why me?" she asked. Dominic answered without hesitation. "Because you see people before you see problems." The simplicity of his response meant more than a long explanation ever could. Nia accepted, not because of Dominic's power or influence, but because she believed in the mission they were creating together. Meanwhile, outside their growing partnership, some people still questioned Dominic's choices. They wondered why a man known for control had begun listening so openly to someone who came from a completely different world. Dominic heard the questions, but no longer felt the need to answer every opinion. He had finally learned that true strength was not proving everyone wrong. It was knowing which voices deserved to be heard. And as Dominic and Nia continued building something meaningful together, the world slowly began to understand that the most powerful moment of the gala was never about the attention they received. It was about the quiet act of kindness that revealed who Dominic Carter truly was. Several months passed, and the foundation that Dominic Carter and Nia Brooks had built together became one of the most respected community programs in the city. Every classroom was filled with students discovering new opportunities. Every volunteer understood the mission, and every family who walked through the doors felt welcomed with dignity rather than judgment. The success attracted attention from newspapers, local officials, and charitable organizations across the state. Yet Dominic remained exactly as he had always been. He stood near the back of every event instead of the stage, allowing teachers, students, and volunteers to receive the recognition they deserved. Nia noticed this pattern every single time. Whenever someone praised the foundation, Dominic quietly redirected the conversation toward the people doing the daily work. One afternoon, the organization hosted a community appreciation ceremony inside the same grand hotel where everything had begun months earlier. As guests entered the beautifully decorated ballroom, many remembered the unforgettable misunderstanding that had once dominated every conversation. This time, however, the atmosphere felt completely different. Laughter replaced whispers, respect replaced suspicion, and the ballroom that had once witnessed confusion now celebrated hope. During the ceremony, several young scholarship recipients shared stories about how the foundation had changed their lives. One student spoke about becoming the first member of her family to attend college. Another described how free tutoring had helped him discover a passion for engineering. Every story reminded Nia why she had chosen to continue this journey beside Dominic. When the final presentation ended, the Master of Ceremonies unexpectedly invited Dominic to the stage to receive a Community Leadership Award. The audience applauded warmly as he slowly approached the microphone. He looked across the room for a brief moment before speaking. "This recognition does not belong to one person," he said calmly. "It belongs to every teacher who stayed after class, every volunteer who gave away precious time, every parent who refused to stop believing in their children, and every young person who decided their future was worth fighting for." The applause became even louder, but Dominic gently raised one hand before continuing. "There is one more person who deserves to stand here." He turned toward Nia, who remained seated among the guests, completely surprised. "Please join me." The ballroom became silent as she walked to the stage. Dominic stepped aside instead of standing at the center. "The heart of this foundation has never been money or influence," he said. "It has always been compassion, and she reminds all of us that kindness becomes powerful only when it is put into action." Nia looked at him with quiet emotion before answering softly into the microphone. "I once believed strength belonged only to the people with the loudest voices. Then I met someone who taught me that real strength often chooses silence, accepts misunderstanding, and protects others without asking for recognition." Their eyes met briefly, and no further explanation was necessary. Everyone inside the ballroom understood that the remarkable moment months earlier had never been about creating attention. It had been about preserving another person's dignity. As the evening drew to a close, guests gathered around them not to discuss old rumors, but to thank them for the lives that had been changed through their partnership. Walking together toward the ballroom exit beneath warm crystal lights, Dominic quietly smiled. "Do you still wonder why I made that decision?" he asked. Nia returned the smile with complete certainty. "No," she answered. "Now I only wonder how many other people have been protected by kindness they never even noticed." 1 year later, the foundation had grown beyond anything Dominic Carter or Nia Brooks had imagined on the evening their paths unexpectedly crossed. What had begun as a single community project now supported schools, mentorship programs, scholarships, and neighborhood initiatives throughout the state. Families who had once struggled to find opportunities now watched their children discover futures filled with possibility. Yet despite every achievement, Dominic continued living by the same quiet principle that had guided him from the beginning. He never measured success by headlines or applause. He measured it by the number of lives that became brighter after someone chose kindness over pride. On a warm spring afternoon, the foundation hosted its annual celebration in the gardens surrounding its main campus. Students laughed beneath flowering trees, while teachers greeted former graduates who had returned to volunteer beside the next generation. Parents shared stories of hope that only a year earlier had seemed impossible. Dominic arrived without an escort, wearing the same understated elegance that had always reflected his character. Rather than moving toward the stage prepared for honored guests, he walked through the crowd shaking hands with volunteers, thanking maintenance workers, greeting children by name, and listening patiently to every conversation. Nia watched him from across the garden with a quiet smile. She remembered the first time she had seen him surrounded by misunderstanding inside a crowded ballroom. Today, the same man was surrounded by gratitude, yet nothing about him had changed except the peace in his eyes. As the afternoon ceremony came to an end, several scholarship recipients presented Dominic and Nia with a framed photograph showing the very first group of students who had entered the foundation together. At the bottom of the photograph, a simple handwritten message read, "Thank you for believing in people before they believed in themselves." Dominic remained silent for several moments while reading those words. Finally, he looked toward Nia and smiled with genuine warmth. "This will always mean more than any award," he said quietly. Nia nodded in complete agreement. Because it was earned through compassion. As guests slowly departed beneath the golden light of the setting sun, Dominic and Nia walked together along a peaceful garden path lined with blooming flowers and newly planted trees. The evening breeze carried the joyful sounds of children still playing nearby. Neither of them felt any need to hurry. They had learned that the most meaningful moments rarely arrived through dramatic gestures. They were built slowly through trust, honesty, and everyday choices. Dominic eventually broke the comfortable silence. "Do you ever think about that night?" Nia looked toward the horizon where the last sunlight touched the trees. "Sometimes," she admitted with a gentle smile. "Not because of the misunderstanding. Because it reminded me how easily people judge what they do not understand." Dominic nodded thoughtfully. "Including me." Nia stopped walking and looked directly into his eyes. "No, especially you. You accepted being misunderstood because you believed protecting someone else mattered more than protecting your reputation. That is something very few people would have done." Dominic lowered his eyes briefly before looking back at her with quiet gratitude. For the first time in many years, he no longer felt defined by the stories strangers told about him. He felt defined by the people whose lives had changed because compassion had guided his decisions. Together, they continued walking as evening settled gently across the gardens, leaving behind not the memory of a shocking moment that had once frozen an entire ballroom, but the lasting truth that dignity is never defended through power alone. It is protected through humility, courage, and the willingness to do the right thing even when no one understands why. And on that peaceful evening, everyone who had witnessed their journey finally understood that the strongest hearts are remembered not for the moments that captured attention, but for the quiet choices that changed lives forever.